give me one shot here on a blue chip stock, believe me, Kevin, the only problem you're gonna have is that you didn't buy more.
Nobody knows if the stock is going to go up, down, sideways, or in circles.
What's going on, NBA draft fans? Your boy is back, the Wolf of Ball Street, the Draftdaq NBA Draft Podcast. I am your host, Corey Tulaba, and I am not here this week with my co-host, Albert Gim. Albert has COVID, and he's recovering this week. The reason that we didn't have an episode last week is because I had COVID last week, but I didn't want to go 2 weeks without bringing you guys and girls an episode. So I decided that today I would reach out to Twitter, and we did this last draft cycle as well, and I would do a follower Q&A. So I tweeted out, let's give me your draft related questions, and I'm here to answer them today. So let's just get into the questions. First question is from Stone Hansen at Report Court. Which prospect is league average shooting most crucial for you to consider them a first round pick? Now, one of these prospects, I'm going to give two answers. One of the prospects I would have as a first rounder irregardless, but I think that Trevor Keels, if he becomes a league average shooter, it's going to help him tremendously. He's shot it a little bit better recently, but outside of that first game against Kentucky, he's kind of been way off with his shooting. I think the form is okay. It's not perfect, but he looks like a guy who's going to be able to shoot it at least at league average. And while I'm not as high on Trevor Keels as maybe the ESPN guys are, who have him as a potential top 10 pick, maybe as a guy like Tyler Rucker backcourt violation is in as far as the no ceilings crew goes. But I think that Trevor Keels is a really good prospect who has a lot to offer and is a guy that numbers aren't going to necessarily do him justice. But if he ever becomes a league average shooter, I think that's going to do wonders. Now, as far as the part of the question that says what prospect is league average shooting most crucial for you to consider them a first round pick, I think that goes to Peyton Watson. Now, UCLA hasn't played in a really long time. This is such a weird season, and Peyton Watson is clearly very, very raw. I don't necessarily, and I've mentioned this every now and then on this podcast, on some guest podcasts, I don't necessarily believe that he's this wing creator kind of Paul George kind of guy. I think he's more of a four who, if he bulks up, could be a fun kind of small ball five potentially. But if he has he does have a little bit of creation skill. He's a fluid ball handler. And I think that if he becomes a league average shooter, it's going to open up so much for his game. I still think that 4 spot is going to be ultimately where his bread is buttered, even if he does improve the shooting. But if he became a league average shooter, and if he just started, when UCLA gets through another string of games, if he shows that he's been in the lab and his shooting is improved, and I think that'll just do wonders for him to get back on the radar as a first round prospect, because for the most part, he's fallen out of favor big time as far as the first round picks. So that is our first question as far as who I think shooting is most important for. All right, next up from Thunder Chats, great podcast. I think that, and this is a Thunder specific question, he says, Chet, Paolo, Jabari, and Durant are all very different skilled big men. Which one do you think fits best with the Thunder? And immediately, I kind of think Paolo and Durant are my bottom 2 choices, and it would be between Chet or Jabari. I think that the ball is going to be in Shea and Giddey's hands a ton, and deservedly so. Giddey has looked phenomenal. Shea is one of the most underrated players in the league. His ability to create for himself and is amazing. I think he's a great pick and roll player. I personally would go Chet over Jabari in general, but Jabari is such a seamless fit with those two, because I don't think Jabari is like a number. I don't think he's a number one guy, but I think that he is an absolutely potentially elite number two guy because his spot up shooting is, I think, an absolute lock to translate. And he's shooting it, 43, 44% this year. It looks so good. He's shown the flashes of the pull up shooting and transition, but I don't think he has the ball handling creativity to kind of be a guy that you just go to time after time in the clutch. I do think that SGA is. And I think that the passing of Giddey and as a pick and roll or pick and pop partner, like Jabari is perfect. But with Chet, and I know that Thunder fans would probably be a little bit scared off with Chet based on their experience with Poku. Maybe they're still all in on Poku. I don't know. But Chet is just a way, way, way better prospect than Poku ever was. I mean, Chet also is a supporting, more of a supporting piece than a guy like maybe Paolo is. But I think that what he could do for their defense would be fantastic. He's another guy that doesn't need the ball, so I think that his spot up shooting is gonna translate to the league. He's had a history of shooting it really well, even if he's not like lighting the net on fire from behind the arc this year. He's done it throughout high school. The shot looks good. The form is good. He does have a little bit of like second side creation or like catch the ball, rip through. Like he loves ripping baseline. And I just think that his versatility and the effect he's going to have defensively as a shot blocker will be huge for, the guys that they have on that team. And you pair him with Dort out on the perimeter, I think that could be a really good pairing. And again, he's a guy that just fits next to their two young stars while also having enough potential of his own to be an impact player. He's like, it's not drafting for fit, but I do think they fit so well next to the guys that they already have. So it's between Jabari or Chet, and personally, just because I think Chet is a better prospect than Jabari as of today, I would go with Chet. All right. Next, let's go to my teammate from No Ceilings. And by the way, if you have not yet, we released our version 2 big board update on the No Ceilings feed. So go subscribe to that because it's free. NoCeilings@substack.com. Nathan from Draft Deeper says, which of these big men are you highest on currently? And do you think that answer will remain the same by the end of the scouting cycle? Walker Kessler, Mark Williams, Christian Koloko, Ishmael Kamagati, and Yannick Sosa. So currently, I think that I'm highest on Mark Williams. Not necessarily in our crew, No Ceilings, the most popular guy. I've somehow become the Mark Williams guy when preseason, in our preseason questionnaires that we did, our 5-on-5 type deals, I said that he was probably the guy that had the most likely chance to disappoint. But I do love what Mark Williams brings to the table. I think that when I look at those guys, I just think he's probably the easiest guy to slot into an NBA, to any NBA team. I don't think he's ever going to be a shooter. I don't think he's going to be a guy you go to in the post. I don't think he's a guy that you're going to go and give the ball and let him face up and take guys off the dribble. His game's very simple. It's lob threat, rim runner in transition, and then anchor defense. I think guys like him, you look at like a Daniel Gafford, like they're guys that they're just easy to have them succeed in a lot of NBA contexts. He doesn't have the highest potential, or as much potential as maybe Sosa. We thought Sosa did earlier in the season, but 7'7" wingspan, good athlete, and he's had a couple of really standout games this year. Against Gonzaga, he looked really good in Duke's last game, monster game there. So I think that he's a guy that is probably my favorite right now, but Kamagati's definitely a guy who could change my mind by the end of the cycle. I have not watched as much film on him as I have with Mark Williams, and maybe that's why I have Williams rated higher right now. But he does have some really fun skills. his shot looks fluid enough. His block numbers have been kind of crazy, and he's just another guy that I think is similar to Williams, but maybe because the shot looks a little more fluid, maybe there's a little bit more potential there. I think he's a pretty decent passer as well. Like the numbers might not show it, but I think that he's shown some flashes of that. So I definitely could see him passing up Mark Williams on my rankings in the long term. I know that Koloko is a popular name. He's definitely risen up my board personally. I think that Arizona is an unbelievably fun team to watch, and he's definitely one of the reasons as to why. And as Tyler Rucker likes to say, sometimes it just takes time, and it's finally his time. He's a little bit older, but that's fine. I'm not an ageist. So I like Koloko too. He's another guy that maybe I could see passing up Mark Williams. It wouldn't be the craziest thing that happened, but I'm going to ride with Mark Williams from Duke for a little bit longer. All right. My guy, Steve Pelletier at Burke Worldwide. Who's your personal preference and why among the sophomore guards, Mathurin, Ivy, and Jonathan Davis? All right, so in my personal rankings right now, I still have Ivy atop the guard rankings. So Ivy out of those three is the guy, but Jonathan Davis is not far behind. That kid is legit. I'm going to see him in a couple of weeks when they play Rutgers. I can't wait. Obviously, his game against Ivy, 37 points, 14 rebounds. He only had 3 assists, but if you watch the game, the way that he was creating shots for his teammates, like it does not do the numbers justice. He was awesome as a playmaker in those situations as well. Mathurin, I love. He's another guy that's really high on my board. All three of those guys are, in my top 10. Jonathan Davis, I think I've moved him up to 5, and I actually have Ivy either 3 or 4 right now. I'm not sure where I've committed. My thing with Ivy, like he just has an extra gear athletically that is really impressive to me, and he he has really good body control and he kind of knows how to hone it, but also you could see there's so much room for improvement. And the way the NBA game is played, like I think his athleticism is just tailor-made for the league. Like he's not really featured a lot in Purdue's offense. They run so much through Trevion Williams and Zach Edey, and for good reason, because against college, defenses, like Edey is almost unstoppable unless you throw a double against him because he's so big. And when I saw him in person, like he's even crazier to look at in person than he is on the screen. And Trevion Williams, one of my favorite prospects in the entire draft, just as far as like who's fun to watch, another first round guy on my board. They just run so much offense through the post and through their big guys. With Williams, they run him a little bit more perimeter based stuff for him because he's such a good passer. So, they run some horn stuff and handoffs. But I think that the fact that Ivy is still thriving, not running a ton of like spread pick and roll where he's able to come off these handoffs. And I think the spot up shooting is real. His form's not my favorite in the world. I think the upper body looks pretty good. He's a little bit skinny down low. I wish he was a little bit more balanced, a little bit more in a fighting stance rather than having his feet so close together, but that's fine. Like the shots are going in. It looks good. It looks smooth. And he's a guy that clearly worked on his game a ton, as that wasn't necessarily his strength last year. But he really reminds me of Zach LaVine. I know that John Morant was kind of the popular, is the popular, and I see it. There's a lot of that too. But to me, like Zach LaVine, neither one of these guys has like a ton of shake to create by themselves, but there's enough there to add on to the athleticism and the strength that they're going to be able to beat guys off the bounce. And again, back to like the more spacing in the NBA, I think it's going to be even more devastating. I think that he's definitely a better passer at this stage of his career than Zach LaVine was. Like his vision is, I think, really good. I think he's been tremendous in pick and roll when he does get the opportunity. I just think there's something there. Jonathan Davis, though, there's so much Devin Booker to his game. He's just so smooth. He's so, he's ambidextrous, so you never know what he's going to do. He's a master of that mid-range. He can pull up. He can kind of post up. He can take it all the way to the hoop. I know some people say that he's not, like, he doesn't have that jaw-dropping, eye-popping athleticism that Ivy has, but I think he's going to be underrated as an athlete throughout this process. Like, he has some burst to him. Like, he's quick. He gets low to the ground, and he can explode, and he plays with change of pace, and I love that about him. He's probably one of my favorite guys to watch in the class, even if I have him 5th on my personal board right now. And obviously, like, having a standout game like that, against a guy that people are saying is the guy that you need to pass as the best guard in the class. I mean, that's huge. And the lights were bright, and he stepped up to the challenge and far exceeded what anybody thought he would do. So, huge fan. I mean, obviously, like, his shot looks clean enough in the mid range, and he's shooting it at a decent enough clip behind the line that it's not hard to see him developing that pull-up shot. But even Devin Booker, I mentioned him again, like, Devin Booker has not been a good pull-up three-point shooter throughout his career, even if the shot looks pretty. Like, the percentages have not bore out for Booker as a pull-up shooter from beyond the arc. Mid-range master, but not behind the arc. And that could be the same thing for Johnny Davis. So I'm not worried about the 3-point pull-up stuff at all. And I mean, he buried a huge one at the end of the Purdue game, so it's not like he's incapable of doing it. It's definitely something that I think is going to develop as part of his game. And I mean, the kid's legit. I'm just riding with Ivy a little bit longer because just athletically, like, that stuff does matter. And again, a very good athlete himself, Johnny Davis, just not in that same tier. So yeah, I think that I'm gonna roll with Ivy a little bit longer. I think that the kid he's tailor-made for the NBA, and I think contextually, like, he needs to. I really want to see him go to a spot that fits what he does best. I don't want to see him go to some place that's log jammed or tries to make him into something he's not. Because I think that even if he doesn't develop right away in the same way that I could see, like, Johnny Davis coming out of the gate and being awesome right away, and maybe with Ivy it takes a few years, but, like, I think his developmental arc is going to get to a point where he can just explode, even if he's not awesome right away. And there's a chance that he is, but I'm going to roll with Ivy. All right. C. Tizzy asks, how good is the 3-and-D wing depth this year compared to years past? All right, so I did a little bit of homework dating back the last 3 drafts to see who was kind of the 3-and-D guys in the last 3 drafts. In 2019, you had DeAndre Hunter, Cam Reddish, Cam Johnson, and then, you got guys like Tybal, maybe Nas Little. Maybe the 3-and-D with them is being a little generous compared to some of the other guys. In 2020, you got Denny Abdia, who I think has turned into kind of a 3-and-D guy this year. The 3 is not, like, knocked down, but the defense has been tremendous, and he's a decent enough shooter that you have to respect it. Devin Vassell, who's kind of like the most prototypical 3-and-D guy of the 2020 class. Then you have, like, Sadiq Bey and Desmond Bane, who both offer a little bit of that, but I also think they offer a little bit more. And Desmond Bane has been, unbelievable. Then you got a guy like Isaac Okoro and Patrick Williams, who Okoro struggled as a shooter, definitely not 3-and-D, but he's, 3 and hopefully D1 or D and hopefully 3 one day. And Patrick Williams he's a good enough 3-point shooter. The percentages are there, but he's not like a guy that's shooting at a crazy volume. And his defense probably a little bit overrated as a whole, but he's kind of in that mold a little bit, especially when he comes back, having to play off of Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan. He'll be a little bit more 3-and-D. 2021, you got maybe a guy like Moody. We haven't seen a ton of them this year. Franz, who definitely 3-and-D, but he's 3-and-D plus to the extreme because he's been one of the best rookies in this absolutely loaded class. Quentin Grimes for the Knicks, and again, these guys are young, so a lot of them are not getting a ton of minutes. Zaire Williams, I guess you could throw in there. If you've listened to this podcast before, you know I'm not like the biggest Zaire Williams fan, but I think that if there's a path for him to succeed, and I think playing with Ja Morant and Desmond Bane and all of the guys in Memphis, like if there's any contextual spot for him to succeed, it'd be as a 3-and-D guy in Memphis, where he doesn't have to worry about being that self-creator that he maybe was billed as, in high school. And then Trey Murphy, who's probably the most like straight up 3-and-D of all of those names. And, he's not getting a ton of burn yet, but he will. So in this class, there's not a lot of 3-and-D guys. So I don't think that the 3-and-D wing depth this year is all that good compared to the last few years. I mean, Marjan Beauchamp, not really a 3-and-D guy. Hopefully one day it reminds me so much of Josh Howard. Love his game. Have him in the top 20, but not yet. You got Agbaji, I think, is probably at the next level, a little bit of a 3-and-D guy. Maybe he'll be able to do a little bit more, but probably that's going to be where he could slot in right away as a 3-and-D guy. But he doesn't have like that big, he doesn't have the height and the big frame to like guard up to like fours necessarily like you want. He's more of like a 2-3 swing. Hypothetically, Ousmane Dieng, he's not really getting a ton of burn in New Zealand, but he does have the potential to be that 3-and-D player who can also run some pick and rolls. Maybe you got Alan Flanagan, maybe a little bit of Champagne. I don't think the actual 3-and-D depth is all that good. It's similar to, this draft doesn't have great depth at point guard, or at least any standouts. There are a decent enough amount of point guards, but maybe none that you project to be starters necessarily. There's a world where that happens. I don't think the 3-and-D depth is all that great, to be completely honest. But, I'm sure that there are going to be players that pop up that you weren't necessarily expecting that develop that shot a little bit earlier and become that. All right. Couple of questions by @Rockets fan Sid. First, is Mathurin purely a guard, or do you think he would fare well as a 3? I look at him as a shooting guard. I know he's listed some places at 6'7", but I think that he looks a little bit smaller than that. Like, I think he looks like the prototypical 2 guard. So I would feel more comfortable drafting him with that in mind. But I do think that he's got he's not a small 2 guard. So I do think that he has the size and the athleticism to guard up to be a 3 as well. I just think his best role will be as a guard. And, I know I went on and on about Johnny Davis and Jaden Ivey a little bit earlier in that question, but like I'm very high on Mathurin too. I thought he was the best prospect in that conference preseason. I think he's shown to be that. I thought he was awesome in the U19s with Team Canada, and he showed a little bit of the stuff that he's getting to show this year. His shot is awesome. I love how high he can get it. I love how he can hit it with guys draped all over him, off movement. I think he's going to be just an awesome player in the league. So I don't want to kind of skip over him as what I think he brings to the table for an NBA construct. And I think that he'll fit in so many scenarios. Like, he's not a guy that needs to go to the perfect scenario, because he could fall back on his shooting and being a defender and a guy who can get out and transition, cut to the basket, stuff like that. And if you could fall back on that, you could fit pretty much anywhere. Unless the team early on just wants to give him reps on ball and see how that goes and just be bad, and maybe that'll help. Because philosophically, I have kind of developed kind of an intrigue in guys who have outlier developmental situations. And it's why I'm not completely out on this overtime elite thing. Like, the freedom to do stuff early on, even if it's not ultimately what you're going to be able to do, I think is really interesting for your development going forward. So I wouldn't bet on that scenario happening for him, but it would be an interesting scenario nonetheless. Second question from @Rockets fan Sid was, which guys in the 5 to 8 range do you think would fit well with the Rockets, especially with Şengün at the 5? Now, if you're a longtime listener of this podcast, you know that Şengün was my guy. I had him top 5 in the drafts. And the 5 to 8 range is a little bit tricky. obviously, like, you put Jabari Smith or Chet next to Şengün, now we're cooking with gas. You know what I mean? Like, to me, I want the Rockets to land Chet so badly. I think it would be such a good fit. He'd be such a good fit alongside Şengün. He'd be such a good fit for Jalen and Josh Christopher. Like, that's what I'm hoping. Jabari, just as a guy who could spread the floor, play outside in, while Şengün, I know, I mean, he could definitely, I think, long-term projects as a shooter. He's shown it to be pretty decent enough, even if it's not on great volume yet. He's definitely underrated as a guy who could take you off the bounce. So, but I think Jabari as a floor spacer and as like a potential cutter for Şengün's passing be great. Now, that's not the question. The question is, in the 5 to 8 range, who would fit well with the Rockets? I think Mathurin would fit really well next to Şengün. Obviously not as a front court guy, but as another guy that he's going to cut to the hoop and space the floor. And Şengün is just a tremendous passer, so he'll find them in the post. And I also think that he's not so ball dominant that he can't play next to Jalen Green. I know that I also said that he'd probably be a 2 guard instead of a 3 guard. So maybe not the ideal spot personally, but I do think that just offensively from a basketball fit, I think that would be great. I think Patrick Baldwin Jr. would be a pretty good fit. I mean, his college season has just gone about as bad as it possibly could have. He's shown just absolutely nothing like to hang his hat on based on what you expected from him preseason. And who knows? I mean, he played 11 minutes. I think he got hurt. Milwaukee's not, barely playing any games because this is a weird COVID year. Outside of one game where he went 6 for 6, I mean, people have questioned the effort. The shooting hasn't gone in, even though it looks beautiful coming off his hands. But I think that he's going to be a better pro than he is college player. And I think that going and playing with an alpha like Jalen Green, I think you could fit him next to Şengün. I think he's a big, big wing who's going to be able to play the 4 if Şengün's playing the 5 and not getting his way. I like Patrick Baldwin next to him. And then Kendall Brown, I think, would be really interesting too, because not a ball dominant guy, kind of working on a comp for him. And I feel like there's a little Sean Marion. Maybe Kendall Brown could be the Matrix reloaded. And I think that, Şengün's passing with Kendall Brown would be unbelievably fun. Not a huge shot blocker per se, and, to have him in the front court, but I think there are lineups that they could be really disruptive because I think that Şengün's an underrated defender. And I think that he would fit with the rest of their roster because he doesn't need the ball and he can just go be athletic, make plays, and do really fun things and be highly efficient while doing it. So Kendall Brown could be a really, really fun fit with the Rockets. All right. Stephen G and guys who, we're doing this and we're recording it live and it's on the No Ceilings YouTube channel. I'm going to answer your questions in a bit once I get through these Twitter questions. So if you've asked a question on YouTube in the comments, appreciate you. I see you, and I will answer your questions in a few minutes. My guy Stephen G just released his big board update. Worked really hard on it. Got a fun draft podcast called Draft Capital that you guys should check out as well. He asks, what skill set do you think is the easiest for a prospect to improve at the next level? Is it positional based? If so, how does it vary by position? I think the easiest skill to improve is probably your spot up shooting. I think that, shooting is just a thing where it's like, how hard do you want to work to get better at it? Even if your form isn't Klay Thompson-esque, like, you can go in the gym and get reps shooting it however you're comfortable with, and you don't need anybody to work out with. And every offense is going to have a spot for a good shooter. So if you're just getting, and you see it, you say, like, if so, does it vary by position? You've seen, like, every position has gotten better at shooting. Like, now it's almost expected if you're a center that you have to be a shooter. Before it was stretch 4s and, the more traditional 5s. Now almost every 5 is expected to be a shooter. So every position has gotten to a point where skills are important, and shooting is one of those skills. And as long as you're a shooter, you're going to have an opportunity, I think to work in the offense. So I think that it's the easiest to improve at. Get in a gym, get with a shooting gun, and just get 1,000 shots up. And you could do that by yourself every day. And there's always going to be need for spot up shooting. If you're big, replicates pick and pop scenarios, right? And if you're a wing, catch and shoot scenarios, drive and kick stuff, right? So I would go with shooting. All right. This is probably my favorite question that I got. It's from Simon, a good friend of the show, Hawks Draft Nerd. Which prospect would you pick to go out to eat with, to pick their brain? What restaurant would you go to? And what would you wear? Now, I'm not too concerned about the clothes because we're going somewhere casual. So I probably just rock a t-shirt and a snapback. But I'm going to go with Tari Eason of LSU. And I want him to pick the restaurant because I want him to take me somewhere in Louisiana that has the best Cajun food there is. If it's a hole in the wall, probably even better. I don't want it to be a chain. I want it to be like an authentic Louisiana Cajun place that you can just go in there and walk out. Probably the meal probably wouldn't even cost you that much, but you just go in there and get really authentic Southern Louisiana food. That would be my answer. And I would want to pick his brain about how he approaches things defensively. What is he looking for when he's off the ball? What's he looking for when he's on the ball? And and offensively, I want to know, how does he think he's going to fit in to an NBA offense? He's probably going to have a little bit lesser of a role early on than he would have that he has in college. So what's he going to do to get on a floor and stay there offensively? So that's kind of where I would go with that question. It was a lot of fun, but definitely had to go somewhere where they had like a specific style of food. All right. Now to the YouTube comments. Dom120. How do you feel about the lack of lead guards in this draft? I was really high on Caleb Love, and he's made some major strides. I just don't see him being picked anywhere in the first round. I don't see Caleb Love being selected in the first round, but he has made major strides. I think that he moves like an NBA guard. If you're a fan of this show, you know that I love like the kinesthetics of how guys move. Like sometimes you just tell a guy moves like a basketball player is supposed to move, and that's how Caleb Love moves. Now, the more consistent he can be with his shooting, the better chance he gets to a chance to make a role for himself in the league. And I actually could absolutely see that happening. Now, as far as like, how do I feel about the lack of lead guards in the draft? Yeah, it's probably the toughest thing to evaluate at this point. Like, Kennedy Chandler has all the stuff that you love out of a lead guard, but he's really tiny. And, another thing philosophically that I've really started to appreciate a little bit more is like, if you're going to be one of these kind of playmakers like he is, like size is starting to matter a little bit. Like the role of the big playmaker it's here. And we've seen like the success of Josh Giddey and LaMelo Ball, and even I think like Franz Wagner, Scotty Barnes, like these big guys who, kind of have come after, obviously start way back with Magic and then evolve to LeBron, and now like jumbo playmakers are the wave. There's not really a good example of that in like the lottery this year. Maybe Taron Armstrong in this draft, who I have as a first rounder, but not an elite prospect, right? Ty Washington to me is like a 1.5. He's a little bit Halliburton-y. I love his pull-up game, but I think his handle's a little loose. I don't necessarily think that it's going to stop him from getting to his spots in the NBA, but I don't know if he has the playmaking chops that like Halliburton. Well, I definitely don't think he has the playmaking chops that Halliburton had. But that's why I don't think he's probably quite the tier of prospect that Halliburton is. there's just not a lot of point guards in this draft that you would really bet on. Jan Montero, again, like the overtime elite, the way that he's getting to experiment there, I'm actually kind of for it. Watching the games, I don't like watching them. I have to have the sound off. The announcers are terrible. It's very AAU, up and down, a little bit disorganized, but like, I like that he's getting to experiment and throw a bunch of, passes that he probably wouldn't be able to do if he was playing in college or, somewhere in Spain. He's getting to do things that I think in the long term could help him when it's time to rein him in. And I do think that he's got the shake and the wiggle and the pull-up ability that you love from a lead guard. But again, I don't know if he has the size. He looks really tiny out there. He looks more in like the Kemba Walker mold. And that kind of player is kind of not in vogue right now. So there's a lot of guys I like. I just don't know what their NBA role is going to be. And it's kind of upsetting because I love guard play. I love point guard play. I just don't, it's just hard to evaluate in the draft, but that's good question. All right. And then we got some love for AJ Griffin, Bennett Mathurin. Teams pass up AJ Griffin or Patrick Baldwin. They slide to the 20s. I'm going to be shocked. 6canada.tv. Yeah, I would be shocked as well. I know that on a lot of mocks, AJ Griffin, he really dropped like drastically right away because, I don't know what the situation was all about. Really weird. I mean, he's still at the end of the first round in ESPN's rankings, even though he started to come around lately. And anytime he's gotten over 20 minutes, he's been awesome. I personally have him top 10. I think he's like 7 or something on my board without having to memorize it. I'd be shocked by the end of this cycle if he's makes it to the 20s, and Patrick Baldwin too. I know that again, he's probably going to have the worst college season out of anybody in the first round. But you look at the size, the skill, his play internationally in high school, like you see the makings, you understand. And I think, Zaire Williams really struggled last year. He was taken at 10. So I think that teams are going to ignore this weird situation where he went to play for his dad, and look at more of the big picture future context while kind of weighing some of the stuff that he did in high school as well. So I'd be shocked as well. Then DY says, why do you have Michael Foster so low? Michael Foster is somebody we haven't really covered a lot. G League Ignite kind of big man. He's producing in the G League. So I do think there's a chance that he does go in the first round, even if he's not getting a ton of press from the draft community right now. But I just don't know. Like, he seems more of like a bench guy to me. Like, I don't know if he's gonna have the defensive chops to be a starter. He's not necessarily like has the height that you want to be a center. And I don't know if he has the exact skill set that you want to be a power forward, but I do think that he's going to have a role to carve out for himself. My friend Nathan from Draft Deeper, he compared him to JaMychal Green. I think that's a pretty apt comp for him. So that could be somewhat entertaining. All right, that's all the questions that I got this time around. I think that we're going to have to do maybe a couple more of these throughout the cycle. Maybe as we get closer to March Madness, and then maybe like pre-draft, and hopefully Albert will be back for these things. Because talking for even the 40 minutes by myself, it's just not for me. I need some conversation. I need some back and forth. But I couldn't go 2 weeks without dropping an episode. Hopefully we will be back to normal next week. Back to covering, one specific prospect. But thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode. Make sure that you subscribe. Make sure you rate the show. You can now rate the show on Spotify as well as Apple. So if you're a Spotify listener, please throw us a rating. And if you haven't, done that yet for Apple, what are you waiting for? Come on, guys. Please, helps us out. And that'd be dope if you did that. Again, head to No Ceilings, subscribe to that. Again, drop the big board. I wrote about Jalen Duren this week because I think that his stock is I think in big picture, a lot of the big evaluators still have him up high in the top 5, but I know the draft community is kind of soured, so I wanted to kind of level that out because I think he's shown some flashes early on. So I wrote about him. Check that out. Head to the NBA Draft Dude YouTube channel because I dropped the first episode of Film Sesh last week. I'm super proud of it. Creatively, it's probably my favorite thing that I've ever done. I did it on Jabari Smith, and if you haven't watched it yet, and you're a fan of, ESPN in the 90s, I think you'll really, really enjoy it. If you have watched it, thank you so much. I've gotten some really awesome feedback on that video and again, I'm really proud of it. So check that out. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you want to hit me up with questions and conversation, anything draft related or hoops related, hit me up on Twitter at Corey Tulaba. And that's it, guys. We did it. Draft Q&A 2022. First version of it. We'll do it again. Appreciate you. And that's it. We out. Peace.